the referee again checking his watch. And there it goes! The final whistle!
Carlo Corazon will wait inside the box for this from Martin Nash. And a header on it there, and that might have been it. That is a goal for Canada. The header was at Jason DeVos.
One last chance for Canada. Sophie Schmidt takes a deflection. Matheson is down the goal. The wins bronze for Canada.
Qualified for World Cup '86, defeating Honduras by a score of 2-1 here in St. John's, Newfoundland this afternoon.
Welcome to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. My name is Jason DeVos. I'm the Director of Development with Canada Soccer. And as always, I'm joined by Brad Fougere, Digital and Corporate Communications Manager with Canada Soccer. Brad, how has your week been so far?
Good, sir. It was going fantastically well until it snowed in Ottawa today.
That's a challenge that's faced by many parts of our country right now. Unfortunately, it's spring, but Mother Nature doesn't want to cooperate. How have you managed that? Is it a lot of snow?
No, there's no snow on the ground. It was just some flurries. Okay. We're looking at record lows tonight. It's just a bump in the road, a bump in the road.
Yeah. I've been very remiss to ask and not ask about your children over the last couple of weeks of the podcast. You have two young children. They are staying home, obviously, as all kids are across the country. How have they managed through COVID-19 and the suspension of school, aside from having a party to begin with? How are they managing so far?
Yeah. Kids are extremely resilient, as you well know, with two youngsters of your own. And they've been just that, quite resilient. I mean, we're starting to see some of the repercussions of limited social time. And that's really my wife and I's biggest concern, just how challenging it is, right? We want them to be learning from kids their age, not from us and the stresses that we're going through in our day-to-day lives.
What stresses? There's no stresses.
For sure. But yeah, no, they're doing good. My son is a gamer, so he's enjoying, the extra time to game. My daughter is probably a budding young athlete. So we got a basketball net and we've got some cones in the backyard. So we've been doing some basketball and soccer training. Yeah, for sure. No, they're doing okay.
It's a return to free play, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. Free play is fairly vital, and we're enjoying it, except on the days where it snows.
Yeah, my kids are a little older. I've got teenagers, but and that presents its own challenges. I think the old expression of little children, little problems, big children, big problems is apt. Screen time is the big challenge for sure, but it's also a social thing. I feel like they've really suffered from not being able to connect with their friends and go through that normal school experience. My daughter's in grade 12 and she's missed grad, she's missed prom, she's missed all of that stuff. So
that's really tough.
Relatively, it's not the biggest challenge in the world for sure, but for her and her world, it's a tough one, I'm sure. But it's been another busy week for Canada Soccer. Give us a little overview of what's taken place this week across all departments.
Correct. Yeah. Well, we're excited to have Rhian with us today to talk a little bit about Inside CanWNT, which kicked off underneath Canada Soccer Nation Inside this week. As I mentioned last week, that will continue to roll out. So Rhian and her co-host, Robin Gale, we'll have Kenneth Heinermuller upcoming and a few other sessions, June 3rd, June 17th, July 1st. You can find all of that on canadasoccer.com under the Canada Soccer Nation Inside banner. I think I referenced this a little bit. We'll also have some referee seminars rolling out over the next little while. I should have more details on that next week. And the Men's Excel seminars are happening at the provincial level across the country. So I'd encourage you to keep an eye out at your provincial association to see if that's an opportunity that's available to you.
Yeah, it was a great insight. I really enjoyed listening to the Rhian and Robin show, I think we should call it.
Agreed.
The two of them have a future in the media. They're both very busy, and I'm very conscious of time. So without further ado, we will welcome to the podcast Miss Rhian Wilkinson. Rhian, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, guys.
I said to you in a text message that if you're not careful, the media is going to come calling. You're going to have a new job on your hands as opposed to just being an assistant coach. You're going to be a media personality as well.
Ooh, I don't think so. Not. I definitely got game day stress from it, though. I was a bit nervous.
Did you? Were you nervous? It didn't come across that way. You look like an old hand at the interview process.
Well, it's always nice when you get to do something like that. It's a bit out of your comfort zone with a friend, former teammate. So it's and obviously our guests as well were people we were comfortable with. So we were happy to kick it off like that with people we were comfortable with.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate to work with the team as an assistant coach at times, and work with yourself as an assistant coach. There's so many cool stories in that group of people, from players to staff, and I'm really excited to listen to how you unravel those stories and are able to communicate those stories to the wider Canadian soccer public. You yourself have an incredible story, and I've told this to Brad already. We will absolutely be having you on as a feature-length interview to tell your life story in the game, and we'll get you on in the weeks to come, because I think it's a tale of perseverance and of shifting into new roles and new responsibilities and learning, which I think is a huge part of your story. So if you're okay with that, we will absolutely have you on at some point in the future.
Love to.
What have you learned through this process of interviewing your former teammates and then diving into that story with them? What was the big takeaway for you?
I would say, I'm not sure I learned it, but what I have found is so critical is the sharing of those journeys, of those different stories, and even how they're delivered. So, Khadija, Alicia Chapman, Diana Matheson, all fabulous people, wonderful soccer players, and their journey to the team was very different. And that's the part where, as someone who works within Canada Soccer and who's, is a huge promoter of our system and how we do things, it's really important for young players to know, whatever sport, but specifically soccer, that your journey is your journey, that comparing yourself to anyone else is just not going to work, because it's never as straightforward as you think. There's always something.
We get asked this question a lot. How does my child get to the pros? How does my child get to the national team? And it's a very difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because everyone has a different story. What are the commonalities, though, that you've seen between your teammates and even your own story? What are the things that you feel all of those women who've reached the highest level, what do they have in common?
I think they've all got a setback in common, at least one, where something has challenged them or stood in their way, or provided a hurdle that they've had to decide. They've had to choose themselves that this is what they want. So it's not an outside drive. It's something they've found inside themselves because of injury, because of being told they weren't good enough, because of, there's so many things that can be that hurdle. And then the biggest ingredient for me is they all have this wonderful ability to never be satisfied. The players that I played with that were definitely better than me did not make it as far because they thought they'd made it. They started coasting, and the commonality between men's, women's, professional players across the world is this drive for self-improvement and never being satisfied with where they are.
What do you feel the young boys and girls in this country who are tuning into these webinars, what do you think is going to be the biggest takeaway for them when they hear these stories?
Well, I think it's a gift of being Canadian, is that we really do have access to all levels of the game. So I remember, Kenneth Heinermüller will just show up at a practice. He just is there. He's a small country in so many ways, the soccer world. And so what I want them to take away is that these professional players that they're watching are them. It's not, I think it's very easy to watch the Olympics or watch World Cups or watch professional games on television and interviews and social media and think that these athletes were born superhuman, gifted in a way that they can never achieve. And we're making it, I hope, accessible enough that they recognize themselves in these athletes, that they were young kids from Brampton, from North Vancouver, from, Montreal, who loved the game and worked hard and got their opportunities. And they're the same. They're going through the exact same thing right now. It's no different.
Yeah, it's an expression that we often use in presentations. We say that not every grassroots player will reach the national team level, but every national team athlete started out in grassroots, and they started in those small communities, in those clubs, wearing those poorly sized uniforms and running around and having oranges at halftime. So, every one of them starts at that level. The other day was an opportunity for you to reminisce a little bit about your first goal in a Canadian jersey. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for me. I thought there were some pictures that came out I'd never seen from that game. And I think some for you as well, Jason, not from that game, but have come out, a goal that I saw, was it against Colombia that you'd scored? Or
it was in black and white, probably. It was that old, Rhian.
It's just been fun. I think this is an excuse for Richard Scott to dive into the archives and bring out these, but that was a very special game for me. I'd got my first cap in Washington. We lost 6-1 to the U.S., and I was there because the girls in the professional league at that time were not released. So they just didn't have enough numbers to make up a roster. So I get this call from Evan Pellerud to just come and make up numbers. And I was like, I'm there. I'll be a pylon, And I went. I ended up playing a couple minutes, my first cap, and then the second one in my hometown. And we don't play in Quebec very often. And it was my second cap. Unfortunately, it came from an injury, but that is sport. You get opportunities at different times for different reasons. And Amber Allen in the 20th minute was injured, and I came on, and don't remember much, but remember the cross coming into the back post, and I just bundled it in. It wasn't like a beautiful header. It wasn't this sort of like aggressive, like going through the ball at the back post. It was just sort of get
they
something
all
on
count,
it.
As long as the ball crosses the line.
Say that. No, absolutely. And it was my hometown and my hometown stadium in front of all my friends and family. So it really was, pretty much a fairy tale.
I joke around with Kenneth about this all the time because he's a very attack-minded coach and was as a player, and I'm obviously a little bit the opposite. But we're going to have an opportunity to hear more from Kenneth in the next webinar that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect in that conversation. I'm
really excited about that one. It's John Herdman's one of my mentors. Just love what he's doing with the men's program now, and everyone knows what he did for the women's program. And then Kenneth came over and took over as head coach from assistant coach, and he's just a different type of guy than John. Equally as good coach, but you just don't hear him as often, and he delivers things differently. So I'm really excited for the Canadian public to get to meet this man that I think is one of the top coaches, and he's so quiet about it that people don't get to know his philosophy or how he's doing things, and I really just want to introduce them to him.
So you touched on this a bit on the webinar last weekend, which was great, but I'm not sure all of our viewers would have heard it. And I just want to revisit it because we will be showing the USA versus Canada match from Winnipeg in 2014, which I know you talked a bit about. This was a bit of a coming out party for Khadija Buchanan. Can we talk a little bit about Khadisha's match that she had in that match and subsequent development, and just from your perspective as the women's national team assistant? Yes,
well, I could speak to it first as Khadija was one of my players. I was her assistant coach for 2014 for the under 20s. And then she became my teammate for the senior team. So I will off the bat just talk about her maturity. I think that is a really hard line to walk, where you're going from someone's player to their teammate. So she's always had this calmness about her and this real maturity that she carries herself with, and it just translates to the field. And that game in Winnipeg, I remember preparing for the game and realizing that I think that there was myself, I must have been about 30, and then we had Khadija, who was maybe 17, Quinny, who was maybe 18, and I think it was Surayeka, who was 17. I was looking at this back line going, oh my gosh. And
they were young.
It was a young back line. And then just during training, just the training sessions, watching these three young players just step up to the plate, and specifically Khadija, and she's shown that time and time again, how she rises to the big occasions. And by that, I mean, she doesn't add, she just delivers. And that's a very important difference, because I do think sometimes players come to these big moments and they feel like they've got to do something spectacular, when really just delivering yourself to whatever level that is what's needed. And she does that. She delivers her top game consistently, no matter who the opposition is. And that's what we saw against the US. And that goal, of course, that just was icing on top of the cake for her and for us.
Needs to work on the celebration a little bit, though, eh?
That was her first goal, and I'm glad we don't see my celebration after mine.
Well,
Yeah.
I've long believed that Khadija is just a superstar. She's already at the very highest level of the game and is only going to get better because she's single-minded and committed to her craft. And it's such a pleasure to work with a player like that. It must be amazing for you, Rhian, as well, transitioning from being a player, working with these players as teammates and now working with them as coaches, especially the younger ones that you see how their development is going. It must excite you for the future of women's soccer in our country.
Absolutely. The talent level in the game excites me. And we know in Canada, it's one of our biggest sports. It is the sport with the most registered athletes, and we're doing a lot of things right. But the biggest thing for me is the character we're developing with these players. They're genuinely good people. And I'm proud of that. I think it's something we do get a little huffy about sometimes in Canada, we're polite, da 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 da. I really think that our reputation of being good people is something to keep with us. It is part of our DNA. It doesn't mean that we play more softly, we're warriors on the field, but the character of the athletes we're developing is definitely something I'm incredibly proud of.
Yeah, walk softly and carry a big stick is probably a good way to summarize it. The next webinar with Kenneth Heinemuller is taking place on May 20th. So be sure to tune in and register for that in advance. Rhian, we know you're very busy and you've got a lot on your plate right now, staying connected with your players through this crazy time we're living in. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing the next webinar and what's beyond for the women's national team. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much to Rhian Wilkinson, assistant coach of women's national team, for providing that insight. And as said before, please register for the upcoming webinar with the women's national team, the Robin and Rhian Show on May 20th, where they'll be speaking with women's national team head coach and Excel director, Kenneth Heinemuller. When we come back after the break, we will be in conversation with Mr. Jim Loughlin, master coach developer with Canada Soccer. We will dive into his story, talk about how he got to where he is, and we will explore all things online coach education with Jim coming up just after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Canada Soccer Nation podcast. I'm Jason deVos, Director of Development with Canada Soccer. And I'm delighted now to be joined by the third member of my staff, Master Coach Developer. We'll dig into what that term means in just a second. Mr. Jim Loughlin. Jim is one of my favorite people in soccer. I met him quite a few years ago now when he was working for Alberta Soccer, and had the opportunity to interview him to join my team. And I had to push to convince him. It's a common trend, I think, with some of my staff. I had to convince Dave as well. But I'm delighted that Jim accepted the challenge, because he is a great human being, first and foremost, but he's also very, very thoughtful and reflective in the work that he does. And he's always looking at what's in the best interest of the person, first and foremost. And I think that's an invaluable approach when it comes to developing coach developers across the country. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Jim Loughlin. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the kind words.
Is that the nicest intro you've ever had, or any kind of intro that you've
100%. 100%.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, because the last 8 weeks, I think and it seems like 8 years perhaps, we've seen a huge shift in what we're doing in online learning and online coach education. So we'll talk about that in a second, but I want to get to to your background, your background in the game, where you started, how you started out, and what was your first memory of the game playing as a youngster in this country?
Yeah, so I was born in Toronto, into a family with a father who grew up around the game in Glasgow, Scotland. And my first memory was told to me by my mom of being about 3 years of age and having my dad running me through kicking a tennis ball against the garage in the back of our house. But my personal first memory was playing for Wexford. I actually started out as a goalkeeper, playing indoor five-a-side soccer, and then moving out to the real game of 11-a-side soccer for 7-year-olds and playing in goal. My goalkeeping career lasted a full game.
How tall were you at that point?
I was a late developer, apparently, because I didn't fit into the 11-a-side goal very well.
Yeah.
My goalkeeping career lasted one game. We lost 1-0 to St. Andrews, and I was blamed for not stopping the ball, and I wanted nothing to do with playing goal after that. So those would be some of my first memories.
You were the goalkeeper that couldn't touch the crossbar, obviously, at that age. And if the players were able to kick it high enough, they could score, correct?
Or even just left or right. I think a 7-year-old in a 24-foot wide goal is going to have a bit of a challenge.
It's amazing when we look back on what was normal back then and compare it to what we're doing now. And we heard from Dave last week. He's got young kids who are going through this phase right now, but we all had that same experience, 11-a-side, full field soccer, a swarm of bees or what have you, swarming around the pitch, around the ball. It's really remarkable when we reflect back on that. So that was your first experience. So you were never destined to be a goalkeeper. What was your next experience with the game? How did you transition to being an outfield player?
Well, we moved to Calgary in the mid to late 70s and moved to a kind of a lower income part of Calgary and started playing the game in our community, and played out mainly as a midfield player, still the 11-a-side game, and my dad was the coach, and grew up playing community soccer until we turned 13 with a view to playing club soccer. And the zone that we were in didn't have enough players to make up a club team. And so 3 of us went to a different zone to play, and my dad might have been part of the package deal because he came over to coach us. So, and I played with the Calgary Eagles Soccer Club for 4 years as a youth player, and then transitioned into the men's side.
In terms of your playing career, how did you progress through the development system in Alberta at that time? What was your first experience with the higher level of soccer beyond the grassroots or even the the youth competitive? What was a provincial team process like for you?
Well, it's interesting because I think the precursor to the provincial team, or a key moment for me, was when I was 15. There was 9 of us that tried out for our under 16 tier 1 team, and 8 players made it. I didn't make it. I was a late developer, a lot smaller than most of my teammates at the time. And within about 12 months from there, I was starting as a center back with the under 16 provincial team. Had provincial teams been selected for 13-year-olds or 14-year-olds, I likely would have been looked over because I was always someone that was in the mix of the team, but never someone that really dominated. And so the first experience was playing with the U16 provincial team in Alberta. And it was a traditional type of tryout. Calgary players were selected, Edmonton players were selected, and then brought together in a central location to see who were the best players there. And ironically, and many will have a difficult time believing this if they saw me play, I was trying out as a striker, not as a center back. But we had an instance where one of the players was late, and the coach said, we're missing a center back. Who wants to play center back? And I just wanted to play, so I put my hand up. And I think my willingness to talk and organize helped me through that.
Yeah,
and I made the team and started as a center back. Yeah,
it's a key attribute of being a center back, isn't it? You know,
big time.
It's interesting. There's a lot of defenders at the national team level, and I count myself in that group, who started out playing in other positions or played as a striker or a midfielder or whatever. In my case, I basically was deemed not good enough to make the team in any of those other positions. And then I managed to catch on as a right fullback. And then at the ripe old age of 17, one of my former coaches made the wise decision of sliding me into a central area, because I wasn't fast enough to be a right fullback either. So I only had one more option, which was to go in goal, but that was never going to happen for me. So, from that point forward, was it like a duck to water to you? Did you just feel at home playing as a center back as opposed to playing in any other position?
Yeah, I did. It was interesting because I'd gone through a growth spurt and a real boost in my confidence. And I went from being afraid of playing against players because I was so much smaller than them to feeling a lot more dominant against players. And as I'd said before, I was willing to really organize and communicate. And at that time, we demanded of our teammates. And so once I was at that level, and the coach of the provincial team, Len Vickery, he encouraged me to take the lead and to tell players what needed to happen and not ask of them. And players, positively, I guess, responded to my direction, and it seemed to work quite well.
So from there, provincial team, you went on to play at the university level. What was that experience like for you? Was that a big step up for you, playing at the University of Alberta, or for the Golden Bears? And who was your coach back then?
So it's interesting. The only reason I went to play soccer with the Golden Bears is because that's where the National Training Center was. And I was identified as a player that was part of the under-19 national team group. And I wanted to do whatever I could to make the side. So Len Vickery, who was the head coach at the time, encouraged me to come up to Edmonton. Moved up to Edmonton. And good fortune shone on me because Bert Kaiser, who was a captain of the national team, of the youth national team at the time, was away at the World Cup. And it opened up a spot for me to start as a 17-year-old at U of A. I was really a boy compared to the players I was playing alongside, and acted as assertive as I did as a youth player. And that wasn't always met with the greatest of responses, but that's who I was. Yeah.
Well, it's always a challenge, I think, when you're a young player or a new player to a team. You have to establish yourself. You mentioned your head coach there, who's got legendary status, I think, in Canada as well as in the province of Alberta, for sure. But Len Vickery, what was he like to work with?
Len was great. He certainly was directive in the sense that we knew what his expectations were of us. And he had no hesitation to demand of us to be, to follow his guidelines. That said, he still gave you the freedom, gave me the freedom to lead. And I remember one moment where we had a conversation after a game, and I had thought that we could have made a different adjustment on the field, not based on what Len had done, but based on what wasn't done. And he said to me, well, just sort it out. If you feel we need to adjust where a player's playing or adjust how we're playing, I expect you to lead, do so. And as long as we're all on the same page, we're not going to be too far wrong at the end of the game or at the end of the day. And that, to me, really freed me up to take on an even greater leadership role. And actually, I think it helped to support my coaching development because I started to learn how to make decisions in the moment or on the fly.
You had an opportunity to play at the national youth team level, Jim, with the under-20s and the under-23s. And we spoke recently about this a little bit, about the entry and exit process. What did you learn through that experience? I don't want to give away the ending of the story, but that was your national team experience. What was that experience like for you?
So it's interesting. I think, first of all, I guess the first learning is that really being focused on a specific goal and working extremely hard to make it happen can pay off. And that really got me in the door where I made the under 19 team and started as a center back. But probably most significantly, and it's I didn't enjoy playing at a national team level, or even when I was in the Canadian Soccer League. I was a perfectionist and super stressed out all the time about being a perfectionist. And one of the reasons I think that I do what I do now is that it wasn't any coach's fault that they didn't recognize that I lacked the belief and was stressed out all the time, because I never showed it. I acted as if I was super confident. I walked on the field as if I owned it. And I really didn't believe that that was the case. And so when I got to the under 23 program, I was with the program for a couple of years, and Bruce Twomley was overseeing the program. And many people have different memories of Bruce as a very intense coach, and he was. But one of the best things that actually happened to me, and I've thanked Bruce for this in the past, and I'd even consider him a mentor and a guide for me in how I interacted with players as a coach, and even how I interact with coaches, is when Bruce released me from the program. Most people wouldn't see that as a positive, and perhaps at the time I didn't. but he did it in such a kind and caring way. Brought me in, sat me down, had a full detailed letter, and went through why he was making the decision, and just how he did it. I could tell he wasn't enjoying the process. And so I would say that's really informed how I interact with people a great deal since then.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have Bruce as the assistant coach with the national youth team and the Olympic team as well. And again, I said the same about Ray Clark on an earlier podcast. I've not found a person or player that played for Bruce that has a bad word to say about him. He was an outstanding coach, very knowledgeable about the game, demanding 100%, absolutely, but really valued people and gave them belief in themselves and belief in their own abilities, and was committed to the cause, which I think is incredible. It ties into a comment that you made back in January on a recording session that we did, where we were talking about failure, and you know, we'll get back to your working career in a second, but I wanted to ask this question because I think it links in nicely. You said back then that failure is an integral component of the learning process. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at how we start out, think about children. We celebrate them failing as they're learning to walk. If you think about parents, and I was never brave enough to have real children. We have fur babies, as in dogs. But when you see a child starting to creep and crawl, and then they stand up and fall over, like, parents freak out, and they get super excited for them, and they celebrate the effort. They don't focus on the failure. They don't stop the child and try to help them to get their base of support right, and to lower their center of gravity, and to just focus. They need to try harder. No, they put barriers away from the stairs so the child doesn't fall down. They get all those sharp objects away for the most part, and they encourage them. And so if we build that out to myself, and I think it's applicable to most everyone, failure can be viewed as you lacking competence or not being capable, or it can be viewed as a learning experience. And Horst Wien has a saying that children don't make mistakes, they gain experience. And I've had family support, I've had colleague support, friend support around my failures, where I've learned to reframe the failure in a way where I can use it as a springboard to build on and go forward, rather than some sort of anchor that held me down.
So give me an example of a time in your career where you have failed, or maybe felt that you failed at something, and then use that as a springboard to come back better and stronger.
I might give you two, and if you'll permit, one real significant one for me was when I was a 15-year-old trying out for our under 16 team, and 8 of my friends that I'd played soccer with for 4 years all made it, and I got cut. Well, originally I wanted to just stop and I wanted to quit, and my dad wasn't having that because he knew that I enjoyed and loved the game. And so we looked at why I might have been cut from the team. And I was still a bit small, but we didn't focus on that. I was soft. I wasn't tough. And my first touch could have been better. And so we used the whole season where I wasn't playing on the top team to work on my first touch, to only play one touch as much as possible and to learn how to tackle. And by the end of that season, and after I grew a wee bit, I was being recognized for being part of the provincial team program. Professionally, I think is another area where I think I've learned from failure, or at least not getting exactly what I wanted to get. There's been several instances in my professional career where I've wanted to take a particular path, either with a job or a particular path with the type of programming that I wanted to do. And I wasn't either selected for the job, or it wasn't what I wanted to do wasn't signed off on. At that moment, it would have been very easy just to turn away from what I was doing and not want to continue being part of coach education, figuring out ways to make the learning environment better for players eventually, but coaches for certain. And rather than stopping or quitting, I just carried on. So Steve Jobs gave a speech for Stanford, I think it's 2005, and he said that this is just a paraphrase for anyone that knows the exact quote. We can't connect the dots going forward. We can only connect them by looking back. And I think every time that I've experienced some sort of setback or a failure, it was necessary for me to improve, either to develop more empathy for those who also fail, because really, we fail most of the time. There's this notion that life is supposed to be wonderful and bliss and happy, and life's hard.
It doesn't work that way. Yeah, it doesn't work.
Not at all. Life is really, really difficult, and it's hard. And so we have to manage the failures. We shouldn't be surprised by them. So looking back now, I'm actually quite happy that I failed where I failed, or maybe I just gained experience on how to be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that Rhian said earlier in the podcast about the commonality between Diana Matheson, Alicia Chapman, Khadija Buchanan, who they interviewed earlier this week on the webinar that they did for the women's national team. But, the common theme is that they've all had setbacks at some level, and it's about developing resiliency and being able to triumph over adversity and put the work in to improve and get better and overcome. So, it's something that I think we often think of being in association with elite athletes, but I think that we can look a lot closer to home at the challenges that we face within coach development, within coach education, within player development. And it doesn't have to be at the elite level. It can also be at the grassroots level as well. And that failure and resiliency is an important component of learning.
I've had a chance to coach for over 20 years at a post-secondary level. And if it wasn't for some of the failures that I had early on as a player or even professionally, I wouldn't be that relatable to the players that I was going to get a chance to interact with, or the student athletes that I was going to get a chance to interact with. And so in many ways, those experiences have helped me to be a better professional. And I'm thankful for them. Yeah.
One of the things that I always say when I'm asked about what your skill sets are is that I feel like you're a real people person, that you're a connector, you're a binder of people, and people gravitate towards you because of your personality. What did you learn through that process? I mean, you talk about 20 years of coaching experience at the post-secondary level. What did you learn over the years? I mean, coaching must have changed during that period of time. I mean, when we were kids, and I don't want to tell everyone how old we are, but we are old. But when we were kids, it was very autocratic. The coach, you do what the coach says, and whatever he says, you must do it. How has coaching changed in the 20 plus years that you've been involved, and what have you learned through that process?
So it's definitely changed from being less less autocratic or less do as I say, not as I do, or it's not on anymore just to tell the players here's how it's going to be and yell at them, be a bit over the top with them. And it's more about trying to connect with the person that you are coaching. And what I found fascinating, because I had the opportunity when I was at Medicine Hat College to coach the men and the women for 12 years, so coaching both teams at the same time. And you'll hear that women really need to know about that you care about them if they're going to play for you. And I'd say men do too. I see no difference there. And I see that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned is that players are people, right? They live a life that we typically have no idea about. They have challenges that we typically have no idea about. I'm sure if we knew their personal stories, we might be really uncomfortable because of the challenges that they've gone through. And if coaches aren't prepared to truly care about those that they're coaching, I think you're going to have a heck of a time connecting with them and helping them to realize who they want to be. I have no problems admitting to anyone that, I wasn't a super tactician. I mean, I knew enough to help teams become competitive, but I was really good at getting players that perhaps didn't have a lot of tier 1 level type of experience to compete for each other and care about each other and really be their personal best on a daily basis. And then on the days when they weren't, accept it, figure out why, and come up with a strategy to be better the next day.
It's a really interesting point. And I say to you, Stuart, Dave, all the time, we're not in the football business. We're in the relationships business. We're in the people business, and we have to build relationships with people. And oftentimes that's difficult. It's not easy to do that. You've worn many hats in your working career. You've been a technical director at the club level, at the district level. You've been a director of operations. You've been a regional coach. You've been a manager of coach education with Alberta Soccer. You've been the technical director of Alberta Soccer. What have you learned through your work life that relates to that, about the people piece, the relationship piece?
Early on, I learned that my ego got in the way of me really connecting with people, and that it didn't matter if what I was sharing with them was right or was going to be found out to be right. I think Maya Angelou has a quote that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you've done, but they won't forget how you've made them feel. And early on, I wasn't great at helping people to feel really good about what they could contribute to the cause, if you will, or to solving a particular problem. But over time, after I burnt a lot of bridges by telling people how it was versus asking them to share their perspective, I learned to ask more questions and provide a lot less answers. And what ended up happening over time is you build relationships with people, and they will feel comfortable giving you feedback that you need to hear and giving you ideas that you can't see because you have blind spots. And it ended up helping me to be a better professional and to be viewed more positively as a professional. And so for me, I've always been grateful because of those relationships, because I'll periodically get a text or an email or a phone call where someone's giving me the heads up about a potential concern down the road. And it's because I've built a relationship with them. And I've, I guess, let them in a wee bit into how I viewed certain things.
It's hard to do, though, isn't it? It's about being vulnerable a little bit. You know, I think that's a big challenge that many coaches face and coach developers face is, you're viewed as the expert. You're viewed as the one who has the knowledge, and you're going to give the knowledge to the recipient when they're ready. And oftentimes the coach or the coach developer is sitting there kind of questioning, I'm not sure if I know the answer to this, and being vulnerable. How important is that, you feel, in the work that you do now?
I think it's very important. I think I don't like to use the term expert I think people are specialists. I think they're always trying to learn more and more about specific things. And when you're interacting with another individual and they view you perhaps as an expert, and they might expect that you know everything, well, they're a person who has their own doubts and fears and memories of failure. And they're going to hold those really close to their chest. They're not going to be looking to share. When you help them understand that you don't have a handle on everything, that you don't fully know all the right answers, if in fact there are right answers, but you are prepared to collaborate with them and to share some of your ideas, and maybe they can kind of build off of those ideas, or they can share some of their ideas which you'll build off of. It opens them up to sharing their perspective on things and realizing that they don't have to be right all the time. And if we think about biochemically what happens to us when we believe that we're in a psychologically and emotionally safe type of environment, we now start, our muscles relax, our blood vessels constrict, or not constrict, they dilate. Blood starts flowing freely. We can pick up on different ideas. It's almost like endorphins are floating around in your system. And for the scientists out there, I know that I've just butchered that a wee bit. We become open to learning. If a coach or a coach developer thinks that I'm the expert and I know it all, they're going to be blocked from really sharing, in my opinion, what they truly are thinking, and they're going to be closed off to learning. And again, biochemically, they're going to probably be in a fight or flight or freeze sort of state, and they're not going to be able to pick up what we're trying to help them pick up. And that's not good.
Yeah, it's that concept of the learner being a receptacle into which the educator is going to pour the knowledge and pour the information. And it just doesn't work that way, certainly not in adult learning. So with that in mind, you look at the work you're doing now for Canada Soccer, developing the coach developers from coast to coast. How have you tackled that massive project? Because it's ours is a massive country and it's a diverse country. How have you gone about tackling that challenge, and what's been the starting point for you?
So, at risk of saying the same thing over and over again, just building relationships with people, having conversations with them about what they're doing in their province or territory, and making myself available to lend support and to help. Being open about perhaps them having concerns that my role is to critique and evaluate them and let them know what they aren't doing well or not doing right, and helping them understand that that's not the plan. We want to focus more on what's working. We want to focus more on how we tweak things to make them a wee bit better. And so by going about that process, I think people have been open to sharing their ideas. And what's been cool about that is that there's been stuff that they've shared that I hadn't considered. And now we're looking to incorporate those ideas into what we're doing. I had a chance to go through some community stream online material with several Ontario learning facilitators this week. And what came up over the call was that we still had to figure out, how do we transition from an online environment into the on-field environment? And I think originally the learning facilitator that asked the question perhaps was hoping that we had a solid answer. And what we had was a solid laugh and said, yeah, that's going to be a challenge. Why don't we all come together 3 weeks from now and discuss strategies? And they were really keen to do that. And so rather than coming across and saying, hey, I'm the expert, just sit back and listen to me, and they'll figure out quick I'm not the expert, I said, why don't we work together to come up with a better strategy? Like Stephen Covey talks about the idea of synergy, where 1 + 1 = 8, not 2. And I think that's what will come from those types of interactions.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of or online learning, you mentioned it a little bit there, and the last 8 weeks, as we've dealt with the suspension of all sanctioned soccer activity and the subsequent shutdown of the delivery of in-person coach education workshops, we've had to transition and transition in a very quick way. What have you learned through that process in terms of online learning? How important is that going to be for Canada Soccer moving forward? And what does the future look like for online learning, do you think?
Well, those are some great questions. The first thing that I've learned is how to be adaptive. I've never been in a situation where I've needed to do voiceover on video to create a mock sound room, and didn't feel comfortable going through that process. And it helped to remind me of the times that we asked coaches or coach developers or players to try stuff that they're not comfortable with or familiar with. And so it was a good reminder to me that we're always learning and we need to embrace it and get after it. Where are we going to be going? Education needs to be accessible, not just to some, but to all. And I think what we have right now, as a consequence of us having to deal with all soccer-related activities being suspended, in person, is we're getting a chance to try alternative ways to learn, and we're getting a chance to investigate ways that we can help bring a massive country together through the internet to learn to be better coaches, more effective coaches, better people, more effective people. And so we've transitioned all of the community stream content that we typically delivered in class into an online environment where we've done voiceover and presented ideas to the coaches and created videos of the content versus just giving them a set of slides for them to read. Mm-hmm. And I think I know the response from the coaches and from the coach developers across the country is that they view what we're doing as very accessible. I had a coach this morning who's also a coach developer send me a text with a picture of a slide from our Active Start online courses. And she said, this slide is going to be so effective in helping me better interact with the parents. And I want to expose the parents to some of this information. And she was super excited because we gave her a tool that she could use to help herself and the parents be better. Where are we going to go down the road? I think we're going to be using a blended learning approach to our coach education, more of a flipped classroom.
What does that mean? I mean, we speak this language all the time, but what's a blended learning approach mean for online learning? So
blended learning, it means that we're going to have some of our learning in an online type of space. And in an academic world, we may use the language of calling it a flipped classroom, where students or coaches can go online and get access to webinars, readings, reflection tools, checks for understanding, to get a base of information, of theory, that they're starting to think about how they would look to apply it in a practical sort of environment. And then down the road, or coupled with the content that they get in that online environment. And in the online environment, Jason, it can be what's called asynchronous or synchronous. So asynchronous, they can do it whenever they want. Some people have different schedules and they can go through the content at a time that suits them. Synchronous is having a set time where people come together to learn, but they don't have to leave their homes. And so they would go through that content, and then they would then get a chance to practice on field in a coaching setting with players or with coaching colleagues, and to develop and try out some of the ideas that they learned when they went through the theory in the online environment. And so it's a blend of traditional education where it's in person, delivered by an instructor or a facilitator from the front of the room or on the field, to some of the content being available online, sometimes with or without an instructor or facilitator, and being in person on the field with a coach developer.
One of the things that jumped off the page at me when I first went around the country and sat down with all of the technical directors in every province and territory was that accessibility and inclusion was a huge component of one of the barriers to coach education. So using a smaller province, Prince Edward Island as an example, there's only ever going to be a certain number of coaches who want to take an advanced coaching license or even a community stream coaching license for that matter. And I asked the question, well, what if it was online? And everyone almost unanimously said that would be fantastic to be able to have those opportunities to learn in an online environment. So from the accessibility perspective, it's a huge component. It was said to me previously by a very experienced coach educator when I asked him about the viability of an online only type of a classroom. He said, well, I can't teach you to play soccer online, so why should I be able to teach you to coach soccer online? But it's about finding the sweet spot, isn't it? It's about, balancing off that accessibility with we want to get on the field and we want to see how you coach and how you communicate with people in person. Is that a fair reflection?
It is. I think it's the ironic part about comments like, I can't teach you to coach in a classroom or in an online environment. What I find ironic about that is that we'll tell players that they need to watch the game to learn to be better players. And so for me, that's, of course, you need to practice. You need to get on the field. You need to interact with players and learn how to affect the players in a positive way, to challenge them to be better. But it's not at the exclusion of getting access to other types of theory, whether it be watching videos, so vicarious types of learning through observing others, reading, reflecting, planning, right? Like it's good to have these practical experiences, but we also need to reflect on those practical experiences to figure out how we can improve. I don't think you can disconnect the two. I think by us being able to make education accessible to anyone around the country, they're going to get a leg up when it comes to them being more effective as coaches, even if we didn't interact with them on the field as a mentor, giving them feedback and guidance. It will enhance the experience of those coaches that we do get a chance to interact with and give feedback in a coaching setting, a practical coaching setting.
Last one for you, Jim, and then I'll let you go. What role does the club TD or the academy technical director play in the education and development of his or her own coaches within their club or academy? Is there a role to play? And if so, what should that role be?
So my wife calls me Premier Loughlin at times, and I don't believe that is a compliment. She does say that I am a bit of a politician. So what I will say to you is definitely the approach I took as a technical director, and that may inform how technical directors at a club level could approach things. If I coach one team, I might impact 16 to 20 players. At a college level, it was up to 25 players. If I coach 16 to 20 coaches who go about influencing 16 to 20 players, my impact is going to be massive. And so I always chose, as a technical director or a club head coach, to focus on developing the coaches and to help them get better and to help them get in the spotlight. I enjoy when people try to find pictures of me in coach education settings or with teams that I've coached, because I typically try to stay away from those. It's not about me. It's about helping the coaches that I get a chance to interact with be better and have the success and feel the joy that comes from being a wee bit in the limelight, and also the challenges that come when things don't go well. And so I think technical directors have an opportunity to really support coaches, help them understand how to effectively interact with the players, how to effectively plan, how to effectively solve problems, how to effectively interact with parents. It's really difficult to do that with all the coaches in your club if you're also coaching a team. And early on, when I was involved as a technical director and club head coach, I was coaching teams. And it made it difficult for me to really keep an eye on the entire club and best support them.
Especially if you're in a club that has a large player base, it becomes impossible to do that. I don't fault any clubs or academies, for that matter, for not really going towards that coach education role for the TD, because I don't know that it's ever really been defined per se. But through the club licensing program, this is a message that Dave Nutt and I deliver on a consistent basis, that the primary responsibility of the technical director should be the development of the coaches within the organization. So, you can't coach every team yourself, but you can help better all of the coaches who are delivering your programs on your behalf. And that's a fair way to sum it up, I think. What's next, Jim? What's the future look like in terms of coach education moving forward in Canada? How do we use online learning? And what's the future look like? Look into your crystal ball very, very quickly for 30 seconds.
Well, no one can say that that online learning can't be interactive anymore. No one can say that you aren't able to connect with people anymore, because they haven't had a chance to choose anything else over the course of the last 8 weeks.
Sink or swim, wasn't it? You figure it out.
big time. And we have, because we are resilient. There's a great book called Anti-Fragile. And the gist of this idea of anti-fragile is that some things break under pressure, so they're fragile. But human beings need to be anti-fragile so that they get better under pressure. They get better when demanded of. And I think that's what's happening, is there's an anti-fragility, and I know that's not an official word, I use many, but there's an anti-fragility that's happening, I believe, in the coach education environment. You just have to look at the manager of coach education, Stuart Neely. He just rolls with it. He might be frustrated, as we all do, because I think that means something to us. But he rolls with it, and maybe he needs to go for a wee walk. I mean, I get a lot of walks in during the day to manage the frustration, but we've figured out how to come together to help each other improve and get better as a large collective. And I think what's going to happen, Jason, is that we're going to be able to use the momentum that has been created and the increased comfort level that people are gaining with an online environment to maximize our time when it comes to learning. There's going to be less time needed to travel to places. There's going to be less time off. I mean, I remember talking to a volunteer coach that was doing a coaching course in Alberta, and it was costing him about $3,000 to complete the course when you factored in travel, hotels, meals, time off work. And he was a volunteer coach. If you look at our comfort level with an online environment now, and I think it's only going to get better, that coach is going to be able to get the majority of their training without having to leave their city or town. I think that's accessible coach education. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's about efficiency, isn't it? I think we're going to become a lot more efficient with our time, with our resources, with our use of technology as well, and use that to enhance the learning experience for coaches and coach developers across the country.
Jason, I think it's honoring the people that were asking to commit so much of their time already to the game.
Yeah.
It's a real respectful approach.
I agree. As always, Jim, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and it's been insightful, and I've learned from you and your experiences. Anything further you'd like to add? Any pearls of wisdom you'd like to part on? A final word?
Well, I'm not sure about pearls of wisdom, but it's back to that idea of connecting the dots. There's lots of stuff that we're going through right now. Yeah. That I think is difficult to explain, and we may not know what is going to happen down the road because of what we're going through. But I know whenever I look back and see the path that I've gone on, I can connect the dots, and I've been happy for the experiences, good and bad. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing how we connect the dots after coming through this. And I look forward to seeing the people that are going to come to the forefront and be leaders in their communities across the country because of these experiences. That's all I got for you.
I think that's not bad. Connecting the dots with Jim Loughlin. I think that's a segment that we could add for future podcast episodes.
as long as we give Mr. Jobs the credit first of all, that's fine.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Jim. Much appreciated. Keep up the great work. And when we come back after the break, I will chat with Brad about his key takeaways and talk about what's up next week. Stay tuned. That was Jim Loughlin, Master Coach Developer with Canada Soccer, and one of my favorite people to talk to. we didn't record it, but unfortunately, but as soon as we finished that little segment, Jim started going off on the fact that if there was a national team for talking, he would be on it. And he can go in some interesting directions, but just a deep thinker, a very insightful human being, and someone I really enjoy working with. Brad, what was the big takeaway for you in that conversation with Jim?
Yeah, it's been really great to get to know these guys, Stu and Dave and Jim. Jim especially.
Are you going to be nicer to them now?
I might not be. I might be though.
No, I didn't think so.
But yeah, no. Probably the thing that had the most resonance for me was the discussion about failure and managing failure. As a parent, it's something that we talk about a lot. As a former coach, it was something that I would also talk about a lot, and the importance of failure.
Yeah.
And I find it's something that's it's being explored in schools, right? My kids, 7 and 8, are hearing this, right? They're being asked to consider whether or not they're going into things with a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And it's something that's really encouraging, because it's definitely not something that we were taught to explore, right? At the ripe old ages of 6 and 7. I mean, the resonance of Jim speaking about how you have to fail before you can walk, we experienced that for sure, but it definitely wasn't, I just don't think that the culture of the sort of 80s and 90s were such that this idea that failure leads to success had the resonance that it has now. And I think it's a really important thing. So that was one of the things that I took away. And Jim, being the relationship builder that he is, it's pretty impossible not to look at that. And one of the things that I was thinking about going through this were times that I struggled in my own coach journey. The times that I struggled the most were the times that I was dealing with the most in my personal life. My wife and I found out that we were pregnant, and I was dealing with cancer and, in my immediate family. And it was times like that when I really struggled to make the connections with the players. And I wrote down here that it became more about X's and O's for me at that time. If I look back, those were the struggles, those were the times when I really struggled the most with coaching, and I didn't necessarily have folks around me who were recognizing it. They didn't necessarily know this is what was going on in my personal life, but in reflection, and I think most people who listen to Jim speak find themselves in deep reflection about their own journey, which is one of the best things about him, and that was definitely something that was left with me. And then obviously the opportunity that comes with online education, and the sort of speed with which we were forced to figure it out over the past number of weeks.
It was very quick. I have to say.
It was for sure.
It's not the big hairy monster that everyone thought it was. I mean, I think we're seeing examples of that now, even at the grassroots level, where clubs are connecting with their players on Zoom calls, Teams calls, whatever video sharing platform you tend to use. We're seeing examples of that across the country. And I think that's a really creative way to keep people connected. And the thing that's jumped out at me over the last 8 weeks or so is that's the missing ingredient. It's the connection that I feel people are missing most. And, listening to Jim and him tell his story and what he learned over the course of his career and what he learns every day, that's the piece that I think stands out the most. I will touch on your point about failure. I was lucky. Again, I'm not going to bore anybody to tell my story, but I was very fortunate that I had parents that didn't mollycoddle me, but they absolutely supported me because I had enough challenges and setbacks in my playing career to last a lifetime, but they always were there to help pick me up again. And I say this to parents over and over again. There's nothing you can do to smooth the path for your child other than be the unconditional source of love and support for them. They're going to stumble, they're going to fall, they're going to hurt themselves, but you need to be there to help them back up. But don't try and take those obstacles away from them, because it's part of their learning journey and it's part of them reaching and fulfilling their potential and their aspirations. And it won't happen for everyone. Not every player is going to make the national team. In fact, it's a very small percentage. But hopefully what people have learned over the last couple of weeks talking with Jim and Dave and Stuart is they've had those same journeys, and it has absolutely helped them develop the skill sets that they have that they are now applying in the jobs that they're doing for Canada Soccer. So there's a whole bunch of key takeaways. I know I'm going to reflect on this when it's up and running, and I'll re-listen to it back again and take out some more golden nuggets of information. I'll connect the dots, as Jim would like to say. What's up next for us, Brad? What's coming on the weekend with Canada Soccer? What should people tune in for? And what do we need to address moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. Exciting on Saturday to be able to showcase the women's national team match against USA from 2014 in Winnipeg. I wasn't at that match, but I definitely vividly remember the discussions around that match.
I was.
So I think
what a great game. What a great
absolutely.
Game.
Absolutely.
It was Khadija Buchanan's coming out party. She was immense. I remember there was a tackle that she made. I believe it was on Heather O'Reilly, down to my left in the corner, and she went right through O'Reilly and won the ball. It was clean, absolutely clean. But I was like, wow, this kid can play. And then she scored the goal as well. There's a couple
tackles that stand out for me in that game.
She had Abby Wambach in her back pocket. It was an impressive display from Khadija.
It was, absolutely. I remember having some discussions with online soccer experts about Khadisha's future and potential, and how gripped I was with her performance and where I thought that she was going. And there was some disagreement, but it's tough to argue now. It's tough to argue now.
There's always disagreement. That's the beautiful sport,
Absolutely. So that's the primary thing. Lots upcoming with Canada Soccer Nation Inside. Everyone can find that information on canadasoccer.com under the Canada Soccer Nation Inside banner.
Awesome. Well, we've had several requests for interviews of guests on the podcast, and keep sending them in to our email address, podcast@canadasoccer.com, or tweet them to us if you so desire. We've got a pretty lengthy list to get through. We haven't finalized who our guest is going to be next week, but we'll promote that early in the week so that you can prepare and get ready and perhaps send in some questions. But I think we'll try and go down to the grassroots level and talk to somebody who's working in the game, either as a technical director or executive director at a club, and talk about how they're managing through these unusual circumstances and what the experience has been like for them, what they've learned, and hopefully we can share best practices. So thank you for listening. As always, for Brad Fougere, I'm Jason deVos, and stay safe, be well, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.